Good morning, Janice.
Good morning.
Today we'll talk about what happens to your stocks when you die. So stocks are your piece of the U.S. economy, and they can represent years of savings, compounding, patience, right? So
Patience.
yeah, right. So it's probably really important to you what happens to your hard-earned investments when you pass away. And the answer really depends mostly on how you own your stocks, right?
Right. So we will cover today what happens to your stocks when you die. For example, if you pass with a trust, with named beneficiaries, with a will, or with absolutely no plan.
Okay. And lastly, I'll explain how each of these types of holding your stock really affect speed and why speed is so important to your stocks when you pass away.
And Anthony has this on good authority because I think he's just almost at 20 years of experience in this field. And also his book on Amazon, How Probate Works. Very good information, especially if this is your first time. It's not necessarily for administering probate, but setting it up now and knowing what people are going to have to deal with your estate. Very good information. Available on Amazon.
Very cool. All right, let's get started. So first thing, what happens to your stocks when you die and your stocks were held in a trust? So without getting into the nitty-gritty detail, basically your trust is an entity that owns the brokerage account, and it has its own rules. And what happens is when you die, the rules of the trust will continue, and whoever were the beneficiaries named in the trust, presumably your wife, your spouse, your kids, will now be the owners of the stock or the trust. So the pros of this is that it's the fastest method possible, and it preserves your privacy. It's a private transaction. It's not going to be a public record ever. The big con, however, is it does take time and money to set up, and it does have to be set up in advance. You probably should hire a lawyer. I don't recommend the online programs.
No.
We're not quite there yet. I mean, robo-lawyers will be there, I believe, but we're not there yet. So that's
maybe sometime.
So that's what happens with trusts.
So then there's transfer on death, meaning just what it sounds. You automatically transfer the stock to the named beneficiaries at the time of death. It's just paperwork and the death certificate. It can be a little bit extra paperwork, but you know what? The pros are it's quick and you don't need an attorney to help you. It's documents which are usually self-explanatory. But the cons are that people forget all the time who they name. So if that conflicts with the will, I mean, it definitely can get complicated. And if there are any disputes, it's going to be a very long court process and probably kind of expensive.
Yeah, I strongly discourage clients from using transfer on death, or known as TOD, or beneficiary designations as their estate plan. This is air quotes. Because, I mean, I know a lot of people think they're being clever and they're hacking the system. Oh, I don't need a lawyer. I figured out how to do an estate plan without a lawyer. I can't think of a single instance where it worked out as intended. And in most cases, it actually causes more problems than it solves. And the $2,000, $1,000 you saved on an estate planning attorney results in like $10,000 in my pocket to do the probate correctly afterwards.
Right.
So if you think you're saving money on lawyers, you're actually paying them more just later.
Right. When you're not here, you're just going to be paying them more out of your
All right, cool. So number 3, what happens to your stocks when you die with a will? So the will is the most familiar structure to everybody. You've heard of a will, you've probably seen movies with will signings and all that good stuff. So it's very familiar. Versus a trust. A trust feels a little foreign. And TOD, I mean, people are like, what are you talking about? What's a TOD? So most people don't even know what you're talking about. But yeah, it's the document that names who are your heirs and receive from you after your death. So the pros are a will go through a probate process, which is a very organized process through the courts that really has structure to tell you who needs to be notified. How do we make sure that these people are the proper heirs? How do we make sure that all the creditors and IRS are properly notified so there's no lingering issues later? So there is a very organized and structured process, especially if there's a dispute. It's really good to have that framework. The con is, because of all that framework and structure, probate can be really, really slow.
Really slow.
So if you have an otherwise simple situation, and I know everyone thinks their situation is simple, but legitimately simple situation, then probate can feel really, really sort of unnecessarily slow. So those are the cons of that.
So how about like 2/3 of Americans that have no plan? they pass. They call it intestate with no will, no plan, no nothing. 2/3 of Americans, that's pretty huge. So what happens? You resort back to the default inheritance laws, which vary by state and can be very complex to very, I don't know, I haven't really seen one that's simple. The pros, you don't have to do anything because there isn't any information. Sounds simple, but the cons are that it's really slow. So you have probate, which we've talked about many times, is very slow. And then you have intestate, where it's resorting back to these inheritance laws. Now they're even slower. I mean, years? Are we talking years?
Could be. I mean, there's a lot. Basically, it's probate plus more headaches because there's more hurdles and more procedures you have to do. Yeah.
So why does speed matter so much? Why does it matter in this process?
All right. So of the 4 choices we just talked about, trust, transfer on death, will, and intestacy, all of those have different levels of speed, meaning how fast will the process play out after you die. So between when you die and when your heirs can actually collect and control the stocks. So why is speed so important? Janice and I have unfortunately seen this firsthand. In a down market, speed kills. Meaning if your stock is tanking, but your heirs don't have the legal authority to sell, that means they're just sitting there.
You're just going to watch it.
They're just
go
watching.
Like this.
Yeah. It's like the worst roller coaster ever.
Yeah, like this slow, agonizing downward spiral that you can't do anything about. Yeah.
So we have literally seen estate accounts cut in half while estates were stuck in probate, meaning an account that was originally $400,000 ended up being $200,000 once we were able to push it through the court system. And I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but we're pretty good at what we do. We're pretty fast.
Right.
So this was as fast as possible, and that's still what happened.
Right. Uh-huh. Like we're trying, we're pushing daily, but we can only push so hard.
So this is more of a problem, or mostly a problem, if you are undiversified. In the case that I'm talking about, it was literally one stock. So if that stock did not do well, and it didn't, the heirs didn't do well.
No.
It's also a problem if you need cash. If your estate doesn't really have any liquid resources, and this is the same with like real estate, and there's a lot of bills to be paid. You have to pay the lawyer, you have to pay court fees and so forth, but there's no money to deal with this. That could cause create a real stressful situation for the heirs. And if you have to sell, let's say you have just debts or other payment obligations in your estate, your heirs may be forced to sell either a piece of real estate or, in this case, stock that's in a down market when it would be better to wait and see if the market rebounds, right? But it's not so much of a problem if you're diversified or if your heirs plan to hold long-term anyway. Because if the heirs, in the case we talked about where the stock tanked from $400,000 to $200,000, but there was a reasonable argument that the stock could recover, then the heirs could just inherit that stock and sit and hold it while they waited to see if it recovered, right? So
absolutely
depends on what you plan on doing or what you think your heirs plan on doing.
And with all of this, I just keep hearing the same thing over and over. Have a good plan. Have it done right. Have it done by a professional. This is not a DIY thing. I mean, you can't go online and try to figure this out. It's just not happening. So again, how probate works, even though you're not probating your own, it's going to really give you a good idea of what to expect and what people are going to have to go through after, and why setting up now is important, and how to set it up so that the end result is easier on your beneficiaries. Available on Amazon. If you want a chance for a free copy, free is good, go online, anthonyspark.com/join. Get on the mailing list. Anthony sends out information, and you could possibly get copies of free books and know when new books are coming out.
Cool. That's all I have for today. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Talk soon.